Right. All right. The course is called Untimely Meditations. It did have a subtitle. I didn't like the subtitle. It's like sexuality, subjectivity, something or other. I could never remember it, so I just thought Untimely Meditations. That's a title that comes out of Nietzsche. Nietzsche, N-I-E-T-Z-S-C-H-E. Wonderful Scrabble word. Nietzsche wrote a book called Ecce Homo, E-C-C-E, Homo, H-O-M-O. This man here, now. This man, the man, this man who's in front of you. That's going to be an understated background of the whole course. So Nietzsche will be a ghost in this course. We'll look at some of his work today, but basically, but I want to explain why the course is entitled Untimely Meditations. It's untimely because untimely means odd, means it doesn't quite fit. It's off somehow. And I think also that this course will get us away from whole questions of time, at least as it was presenting itself in the first semester, with now and here and present. Untimely Meditations is much more aggressive, much more political than the work we were doing last time. And so that's the other thing. If people get offended by any of the political things that happen or get uncomfortable, somehow let me know. But don't let me know by sending a message to somebody else so I find out in third hand. Okay, tell me direct. I'm very New York like that. You know, just come to me, and then we can work it out or not. Now I kept Helen Chadwick up because I happen to like her self-portrait of her brain, or a brain. But anyway, in the middle is a manifesto by a group called Fluxus, which you may hopefully have heard about. But if you haven't, you have heard about. Fluxus, F-L-U-X-U-S. This was set up in the early 60s or something by a guy named George Macunias. I can never pronounce his name right, it's Lithuanian. And he's a bit of a prat in a lot of ways, but one of the things that's interesting about what he did and what this Fluxus thing is doing, which was originally set up as Neo-Dada. So anybody that understands Dadaism has a sense of the Dada, has a sense of surrealism. They came up with this thing called Neo-Dadaism, and they were basically told, come up with a new name, because Neo-Dada sounds stupid, just like postmodernism. It sounds a bit lumpy, you know, or even the worst, the newest version, postmodernism and so on. We've got to come up, that's another challenge we'll have, middle of the course challenge. So Untimely Meditations also has the backbone of the Manifesto of Fluxus, which I'll go over with you in a few minutes. And this is one of the ways it was set up. And a lot of the work that I see here comes out of a Fluxus energy. And I'll be very clear about that and why that's all part of this side of the course. And then this is a work by Jean-Michel Basquiat. I don't know how many people are familiar with his work. A lot of people, everybody, nobody. Okay, he was a New York artist who died on a heroin overdose, which is obviously a drag. I have his work up here because, and also the writing. Partly, in fact, I happen to love his work, which is another reason I'm choosing it. There's been a tendency in art practices that's called semiotics or linguistics, and we are banning that from this class, just because I think it has done more damage to the art world than anything else. I'm sure that other people who are into semiotics can love it, and maybe your other courses are dealing with semiotics, yay, so you'll get it somewhere else. But this course is talking about how you understand how something gets presented, not represented, and how the presentation of something, how it gets to be here, how it makes itself known, cannot rely on a certain form of methodology, a certain kind of linguistic methodology that is very much a part of semiotics and Roland Barthes I know that Roland Barthes is a hero, and is a hero to me as well, but we've got to put him aside for the moment. The whole question of the punctum, the whole question of how image works, just pretend you never heard it. And if you've never heard it, good. Yay. Okay, then you don't have anything to forget. Fine. Anyway, now, Basquiat, in this drawing, which you would really get very different readings from it in this painting, you get very different readings if you take a semiotics read of it versus a Fluxus, or what we're going to call rhizomatic, or you want to go postmodernist, or untimely meditations, this other group that deals with quantum physics. It deals with parallel universes. It has a very different roadmap. So if you're looking at something like the Basquiat, which has figures in there, which has words in there that stand for something, if you were only going to use a semiotic relationship to this painting, you would come up with a very formal reading, or you could come up with a very formal reading of whatever this is saying. I don't know what that painting's saying, but it's saying something. And I don't even know if it's saying it. It might be beating it out like a rhythm. It might, obviously the way things are positioned on the canvas is rhythmical. The way in which the arm is up, it's a figure, F-I-G-U-R-E. Now that we're going to move from the figure to the figural in this course. We're going to go from the question of planes and immanences and different forms of territories to de-territorializing, and then to discursive in a non-linguistic, even though discourse means to speak, in a non-linguistic environment. And then we're going to move from that into, we're going to sort of end up on the Lyotard position around discourse figure and this relationship between the way in which a field is created, called the discourse, and the way in which the figural intersects it. So that's why we have those three moments, to remind you, and also to get you to love these people's work if you can. Okay, so this is where it's happening, but now we know that it's going to be happening in G7, which is the office. Okay, so we get assessment, always an important thing. Now, the first assessment I didn't have on the board there because I didn't know I was going to assign it, which is that you have a 30-second to 1 minute something about School of Art, about, if you want to go, media arts, or philosophy, or queer, or business studies, or education, or I don't care what it is. Just what is it you do here? Talk about it. If you like to kick the wall, like what is it? I just visited the new site. Has anybody seen the new site? Does anybody know there's a new site? There's a new site happening. And it's going to be the new birthplace for the Birmingham Institute for Art and Design. And it's a very big building, a very, very big building. And it's a very good looking building, a very sexy building if you like sort of neo. It's very neo. And there's the top of the line, everything is there. And it is impressive. It is impressive. You walk in there and you go, wow, this is impressive. It actually looks like an enormous version of MIT's Media Lab. And I said that to one of the people there, and they're like, you think so? It's not necessarily a good thing. Anyway, but it is a good thing. This building is amazing. You're gonna love it on one side of it. But it's so antithetical to this building that it's almost hilarious. Okay? Again, which is why you need to at least explain why you like this thing without sounding like you're an aging person from the 19th century. I think it's really important to remind yourself, what is it about this building that makes it work? Okay, anyway, that's your first assessment, which is not even on there. The second one is the first real one, which is that there will be this famous book review that now people know how to do. I would suggest that everyone, including those that are sitting in on the class, give it a go, which is basically, in this case, it's either a 1,500-word analytic review where you use words and you write an essay, or You can do it via sound or whatever your practice is. What I want you to do is take one of the books that we're looking at of the required list and make a comment about it that expresses that book. And so I'm not asking you to say, here's why I like the book. What I'm asking you to do is analyze it, and in whatever type of work you do. That would be one version of it, or the other version is just write out something. Is that clear? It's due on Valentine's Day. All right. Okay. Then we have an essay, and this is again different than last semester, because again I felt that it was just too, it was too old-fashioned philosophy, which I have a lot of time for, believe me. As I said, I'm dyed-in-the-wool version of this. But I do think I'm willing to at least try to see if we can get you to come up with an essay, which would be, that's 2,000, not 200, 2,000 words plus artwork. Okay, or 3,500 word essay, something like that. Or you could do a 3,500 word essay and a piece of art. You don't have to not do your work, your artwork. It's just that the reason I insist on writing is because it allows you to create a certain logical path that you need to play with and develop, so that's why. Questions on that? Note that I don't know when it's due, and that's because there are so many calendars flying around right now, and so many weeks that this course is supposed to be going that even I don't know if it's, I'm assuming it's a 10-week course, but maybe it's a 12-week course, so I'm not sure, and I apologize, so, nobody was, this is the difficulty of you staying with me as a newbie. Okay, now, all, is all clear? No clear? Is it clear? Yeah. Okay, readings, viewings, whatever I call it. I have various titles throughout the outline. You'll see readings, viewings, sightings, beings. I have it one way. Everything that's in this, everything that is required to do the course, you can either get online, or there will be a PDF, or it will be handed out. You don't have to buy any books, although it wouldn't be a tragedy if you did. They'll be on videos, they'll be on YouTube, they'll be MP3, blah, blah, blah. So under required, which got down the next page, are the following. Don't think you have to read all these books. They're required because that's the list you can choose from to do your book review. So the first one is by Karen Barad, Meeting the Universe Halfway. Actually, this is just alphabetized. Meeting the Universe Halfway, Quantum Physics and the Entanglement of Matter. It's a wild book. She's going to come here and speak, by the way. We've got her to agree, and we're just coming up with the time now. Then we have a new cartographer. I've just managed to load down that actual chapter, which I'll send around to everybody, which is basically Deleuze has a book on Foucault called Enchantingly Foucault. And in that book is a chapter called A New Cartographer. And what he's saying in this, which is more or less the basis of the move that's being presented to you, is that rather than talking about discourse as a language, we're talking about discourse as a landscape, discourse as a kind of a terrain, except there's no ground, because you know that problem, the ground that we had last year. So it's a map he's doing. He's a cartographer. He's making paths. He's making, Deleuze is explaining how the Foucault move creates the path. Do you remember last, oh yeah, I know that we had break. Oh, Happy New Year, by the way, everybody. All the rest of it. Okay, welcome back, so on and so forth. We ended up by thinking about telos the last time. Do you remember telos? Do you remember what was involved with telos? There's three things. Can everybody say it out loud? No? One thing? Ground, the goal, and then the process. Yeah, very good. And that created your path. If you knew what your purpose was, then you just sort of had to get yourself in gear and do it. And that's the telos. And then we went through the entire semester of how complicated that little telos can get. This is a rejection of that view, This is saying that there's a different way to create the path. This way is as complicated, so don't worry. But it's a complication that I think you'll understand better because most of you are involved with technology, one way or the other. And technology operates off of this kind of path, which we're going to get into. Okay, so that's what Deleuze talks about. He talks about this new cartography, and he explains how Foucault sets that up. It's a fairly readable chapter for Deleuze. It's quite remarkable. Anyway, okay. Then in 1,000 Plateaus, Capitalism and Schizophrenia, I just managed to load down the entire book, so you can definitely do this. I will send it around on a Dropbox or something, but in any case, if you go to R, does anybody know what ARG is? So it's 5 A's, AAARGH.org. Sign up for it. They have a lot of stuff that you can just load down for free. But normally they ask you to do something in return. Like, so if you've written anything, you have to give them something back. I kind of like it. It's one of these Creative Commons thing. Okay, in there you'll get the entire book. And here's in 1,000 Plateaus, notice the word plateau, map, plane. That's what we're dealing with here. What is philosophy? That could technically go into, that's going to be, if anybody does that for their review, talk to me first. It's got a heavy emphasis on science in there, so I'm not asking you to look at that right away. Then we go to Care of the Self, History of Sexuality, Volume 3. This is a not as well-known thing. Basically what Foucault is saying in this book, and basically this is what is the base, is how we're dealing with it, is that one has a relationship to oneself. So when you think about that, you have a relationship to yourself. So I relate to I. I relate to myself. That relationship of myself to myself, which Foucault explores in terms of masturbation, so don't everybody freak out. So he talks about the masturbatory relationship of self to self. In this relationship that he's setting up, it creates a map, it creates a plateau. This relationship of myself to myself, the myself that I project out, and that projection that I then relate to, has something that you must take care of. You must learn how to care for that projection you put out there. Because, you know, capitalism, beginning to really become much more radically left than I thought I'd ever become, has a way of taking that from you and making you become your CV. And you can very easily become a CV. In fact, you're expected to become your curriculum vitae. You know, that's pretty much as, you know, what's your job, where are you going to go? So what Foucault is talking about is the way in which you develop this thing called the self-to-self relationship, which is rooted, or linked anyway, to the sexual. You need to be aware of that when we go through a little bit. It creates another ground. Chaosmosis, here's where Guattari, of Deleuze and Guattari, he comes up with the way in which one can begin to understand complexity theory, but from the perspective of philosophy and art. So we'll end up dipping into it. It's a fun read. Okay, then we have Heidegger. Heidegger is obviously very key to the course, so he's even more key than some of the, you know, there's Deleuze, there's Foucault, there's Heidegger. There's just been a new translation of this book, of this thing called The Event, which is the Fluxus thing I started out with, Contributions to Philosophy of the Event. And it's, I will have us read one of the main sections, but it's a most accessible for Heidegger. It's a very good translation of what it means to do, let's say, a Fluxus. We'll call it Fluxus at the moment rather than Event. And then, of course, there's identity and difference, which is the main thing that we'll be looking at, how difference is established and how difference creates multiplicity. And then Lyotard, discourse figure, which I mentioned earlier, how, let's say, in Basquiat's work, you have discourse and you have figure. We'll also be looking at Lyotard's the tensor. Like a tensor is like a rubber band, or it's like a tendon. It's like something that has an elastic relationship. He talks about this in terms of sadomasochism. He talks about it in terms of different ways in which one is bound. One is bound to follow something. This is one of the works I want you to understand what we're playing with. Then I said again, Nietzsche this is a fantastic book, Ecce Homo, how one becomes what one is. That really upset people when it first came out in 1871, I think it was, because the first chapter of that book is Why Am I So Wise? And the next chapter is Why Am I So Clever? And the next chapter is Why Do I Write Such Great Books? So people thought he was taking like the Mickey out of it, and there's a lot of writing about this that basically says, well, he did get syphilis and he was a bit off his head, and all of the next chapters after that are all chapters of his other books. They're just chapters. It's an amazing study. You'll see when you look at it. Then we have, of course, George Macunias, and I have the Fluxus thing. We'll go into that in a second. Stephen Shaviro, Without Criteria. Isabel Stangers. These two, Shaviro and Stangers, they're saying Shaviro is basically translating Stangers, and Stangers is translating Whitehead. So between the two of them, it makes it accessible. And then the Format Brothers, which I'm going to show you. Did anybody see that video? Did you look at that video? We'll get to that in a second. Optional. Cloud of Unknowing. This was written in 14th century by a monk, an unknown monk, all about God. It's it's an amazing treatise. If you have a chance, it gives a position between, again, self to self, except his self, or herself, we don't know who it is, the other self was God. And that became very blasphemous, this cloud of unknowing. Then there's the BBC Chaos, Fractals and Dynamics, the video link, which I put up there. The Logic of Sense. You can see, these are all the works that give some sort of background to this. There's some of my work, Animaterialism, Fractal Philosophy, the Eight Technologies, Haraways, When Species Meet, it's a wonderful position about how does one understand who we are. If who we are is an animal, a cyborg, how do you connect? Are we animals? Are we insects? It's like, it's basically how does this type of thinking help us get through that? Then we have Ida Garay, a very famous psychoanalytic feminist who left, in fact, was thrown out of the Lacan Institute. They hated each other. She thought Lacan was a misogynist. He thought that she was, a horrible woman. So we kind of. Anyway, she wrote one of her famous books is The Speculum of the Other, and a speculum, is the thing that a woman has put inside her vagina when she has a gynecological examination. So that the book was called The Speculum of the Other, and the other was the woman whose specula that was going inside the vagina. And this freaked out a lot of people, and how could you talk about the specula, and how could you talk about the vagina? And her response was, well, you're continually going on about the phallus and the lack, and So anyway, she wrote a book called The Forgetting of Air in Heidegger, which you may, for those of you that really found Heidegger tough going, might like this book because it basically charges him with the fact that he forgets he's human. And then there's the Heidegger, sorry, I should say Heidegger. What is called Thinking, interesting book by Heidegger, very important book. It's going to be behind what we're doing. Lucy Lippard, I've mentioned it before. Leotard's Lesson on the Analytic. This is for those of you that are truly into philosophy and really want to push it. Nietzsche's The Genealogy of Morals. The Kaufman translation versus the, where is he? R.J. Hollindale translation, they're very different translations. Kaufman is much more of a social scientist, and everything is very specific and makes sense. Hollindale is much more of a poet, and so everything sort of flows and sounds much more romantic, actually. Okay. Any questions on that? No, we'll just begin. Or are you ready? Are you tired? Are you okay? Beginning? Ready to begin?
Are you sending these outlines out for me?
Yes. I just wanted to. Would you want this? I was going to try and send it before I hit the class. But since I don't have the actual dates on it, does that bother you? So you can have a second outline with the dates? Yeah? That's going to be okay?
Yes.
Thank you. John, you can answer the class.
No.
No. Okay. Thank you. Okay. I will then go through the 10 weeks, and then you can die or something. Just try and stay alive for this. It'll all look like it's really exhausting. The first week is part 1 on method and madness, maps and planes. So this is what really gets you to think differently about dialectics versus rhizomatic discursive thinking. And we start today with a question concerning technology, and also with Fluxus Manifesto, which I'll get back to, but this is basically the manifesto. You gotta love Fluxus. They're very short, they're very brief, they're very, this is what they say, you know, period. And I also want to get into this thing called mobile art, which you'll see in a minute what that's about. So the first one is about Techne and the art of making it work, what it means to have something work, how do you know when your art works, what is the working aspect of it, and then the second is what is the it side of it. So we get into, this is for the second week, we'll get into Foucault's anti-Oedipus called An Introduction to the Non-Fascist Life. And then we go to Heidegger, then we go to fascists. Heidegger concerning technology, that's not a joke. And then we get to the question of difference. And the question of difference will be looking at first, it'll be looking at rhizomes and refrains. I had it reversed. You'll see why, but I should really do one there. And what it is to talk about a rhizome versus a refrain. We get into Deleuze-Guattari, then we have Stan's Cafe, which actually, considering there's going to be James Yarker, who's the artistic director, but actually Michael Walters, who's the deputy head of composition of the Conservatoire, and they want a couple other people to be speaking. They've asked me to speak, but I haven't yet agreed to it. I'll be real, but I haven't agreed to speak. Anyway, and there's all the information for that. Then we get into what is called difference when you deal with Heidegger. So what is called difference when you're dealing with Deleuze-Guattari, questions of multiplicity, and then what is called difference in Heidegger. And you'll begin to see in this how it starts to manifest itself in terms of the internet, how the media age relies on this sense of difference, which is why we're getting to difference making a difference and what that's about. And then your book reviews do. Book review do. Okay. And so for those of you that want to do it, you can do it on anything we're doing seminars on, if that's easier for you. Then we get into intensity and patterns, because so you'll get a sense of how a pattern works, what it is to talk about patterns and the event. Anyway, so we'll get into, it'll be quite sexually, let's say, open. So I didn't put the things to watch on here. I just forgot the link. I can see. I'll put that back on. Then we go into the tensor band. We get into complexity theory and what this has to do with. And you end up rereading glossary. There's various propositions in Deleuze. We get into the Format brothers, so you'll see how that operates. And then we go from the next section, a much more difficult aspect of complexity in terms of morphogenesis, and we start getting into augmented reality, and I'm going to change Lippard because I think we need to have something that's much more hands-on in terms of the way in which morphogenesis works in the net. Although this is she's quite wonderful. And then we end up with quantum physics, Higgs boson, and the problem of non-representation. And that's basically John Mowatt's introduction to Lyotard's discourse figure. In fact, even Lyotard's. Karen Barad, this is not supposed to be there because that was earlier. And that's it. Okay? Any questions so far? You into it? You ready? If you're sitting in, you have to do the work. Right? All good? Yes? Excellent. Okay. Definitely moving to the other room. I guess it's very tough. Maybe stand in front of you. Yes. Okay. these are the 5 points that will sit behind this class and that come up with the fluxes. I just
Bit more.
Okay, you can see that, right? My screen is very different. How about that?
Yeah.
Okay. Now this is very different, as you can already see, than the contemporary critical or contemporary philosophy and aesthetics last time. The first thing to think about here is your attitude. I'm going to start a boot camp here. What's your attitude? But by attitude, I mean your posture. The attitude, do you have those expressions here? The attitude, the way in which your attitude operates? So the attitude is your relationship. We're going to start immediately with your relationship to yourself. Rather than studying the Foucault in this kind of dry sense, literally close your eyes right now. We're going to do a little experiment, and then we'll get to Heidegger. Just close your eyes right now and think, where's my body? Now think about the strangest part of your body. Form an attitude. Form a picture in your mind. Form an attitude. Pick something in your body and form an attitude. Okay, open your eyes. And when I said form an attitude, what did that mean to you, Jakob?
Mostly a feeling, a connection type of.
Good, some sort of connection. Anybody else? Dane? No attitude toward anything. Zero attitude. Okay. It's very important that we get the first line down. What is an attitude? What is this attitude? It's, right. Think about this part of your body. Think about the body and how the body has a presence and how that presence is linking to your mind. This attitude needs to be able to be moved in your mind around. So the attitude can be, I don't mean the attitude is that you're positive about how you look, or you're negative about how you look. I don't mean that as an attitude. It's an attunement. It's being in tune. So the first thing to understand is the relationship of the tuning of something. The attitude is a tuning. It's like your tuning fork in your body. And it doesn't matter which part of the body you pick, by the way. You could deal with your toe, you could deal with your hair, you could deal with an earring, you could deal with piercing, no matter where you are pierced. Hopefully it's interesting. It doesn't matter, it's an attitude you're having toward it. You can have that attunement is your secret. It's a secret, remember those famous secrets that we're doing all the time? It's a secret that is not meant to be hidden from, it's a secret that's meant to be hidden, let's say, from the world, but not to yourself. But in the Western environment, most people have hidden to themselves this attitude. So one of the early things you have to figure out how to do is to get an attitude. This was the basis of, not that we're talking about confidence building, but this is the basis of it. Suddenly I turn to Tony Robbins. Okay, get an attitude. Get a position to your work. It's an angle, your attitude. It's the way in which you can set yourself so you can see it. So the very first line is having an attitude first to your body. As they say, it's not a movement, it's not a style, although secretly it is a movement and a style, but anyway. It's a position, it's an attitude. I'm asking you to figure out how to observe without bringing in an I. How do you observe? How do you feel with your sight? That's what you're being asked to do here. Now, this may seem like child's play, but this is the basis of quantum physics. That's why we're going to go far with this. You just need to get a sense of the fact we're getting rid of the observer, we're getting rid of the I in the very specific sense, and I'm asking you to embody an attitude, this thing called an attitude. Sort of like very cyborg. In fact, pretend you're not human. Try that. Pretend you're something other than human. How would you have an attitude to a pain in the end of your finger? How would you have this attitude? Where you're not going to see the pain. You're not necessarily going to feel the pain, but you're going to know the pain. You're going to know it somehow. This is an attitude. And this relationship between getting some sense of it and having it, this is this map we're creating. This is this ground we're creating. This is the discourse we're creating. First step is attitude. The second step is to understand what it is to do. Well, this is the manifesto, so we're doing it in terms of Fluxus. What it is to involve oneself with, first of all, media, and second of all, intermedia. That's a very old word, intermedia. It's the 60s. I mean, so this is before computers really came out. In fact, it is before computers came out. So the intermedia, it means, don't worry about it with respect to Fluxus. Worry about it in terms of thinking about how many people have mobile phones that have apps to them. Do a lot of people, do people, at least some, so you know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about apps. An app here is going to in some way embody the ability to throw the attitude onto a screen. So you're going to learn how to throw, like ventriloquism. You're going to learn how to throw the attitude somewhere. You're not throwing yourself somewhere, you're throwing an attitude, an app. Fluxus deals, the notion of Fluxus as intermedial or intermedia is saying that there's a thing called the media, which is a network, a communication translation package. So what Macunias was saying here is that artists want to know what happens when you do this. If I just do this, what happens? So it's taking part of the Enlightenment questions, what does it mean to suppose it could be otherwise? But rather than this lofty, what could it mean to be otherwise? What would you think of doing? It really is going, if I press this button like that, what will that do? And if I know that probably it will do something, that the relationship of probability, the relationship of patterns, will start coming in. And I want you to start thinking about patterns. If I just go like this, arbitrarily, just start hitting things arbitrarily with my pointed finger that I already, as a cyborg, have a relationship to this finger. I don't really know what the finger is. It's like I'm kind of got some kind of relationship happening, and I start going like so. What would come out of that? What would come out of that? And how would it work? Would it work as a work of art, for example, if I'm just sitting there like. So the next thing is, as artist, Fluxus asks you, demands, or it doesn't even ask, doesn't even demand it. That's what it's talking about, that there is something to doing this. And it's not that, well, depending on where you are, it either works or doesn't work. No, they're saying it's going to work. So Yoko Ono is the most obvious version that you might be aware of with her conversation paintings or whatever. What conversation paintings? Yeah, something like that there, where she just literally putting things up, or let you do a lot of stuff with string. Just put the string up, this mobile string stuff. What happens if you do that? What happens when you start recombining things, taking things that ought not to be together and sticking them together? What happens? Maybe nothing happens. Maybe it doesn't work. So the question is, what does it mean that it works? Partial answer has to do with attitude. Not your perception. Don't think of attitude as perception. Think of attitude as attunement. The argument with the Fluxus is that they're very simple, it's very small, the texts are short, the performances are brief, and basically it's fun. So that's the other aspect of Fluxus. Always worthwhile. I would go as far as to say that Doctor Who, Doctor Who here, and a lot, I mean, not this series. I don't really like this particular Doctor Who. He's such a grumpy guy. But anyway, whatever. But the other series, with whatever that guy's name is, David somebody.
David Tennant.
David Tennant. I thought it was much more interesting. Anyway, but as my partner has told me many times, it's the Doctor Who you come in on. As the first time you meet Doctor Who, that's the Doctor Who you're always going to like. Okay, well, the first Doctor Who I came to was David Tennant. She actually likes, I don't know, somebody that was in this, some earlier time period, 70s or something. Some sort of, whatever. Anyway, the point is that in those series, if you ever watch any of these sci-fi series, there's always a weird combinings of this and that's. You just can't believe that they combine and do things. And the question is, how come they stick? How come they work? What is it that's making it work? So just keep these things in mind. Okay, next. Now we're going to just get rid of this and just close this down. So now I'm going to have you understand the tough stuff. Not that this wasn't hard, but I asked you to take a look at Heidegger's question concerning technology. What is the question concerning technology? Did anybody wonder what that is? Like, what is the burning question concerning technology? Does anybody wonder?
The thing to do with saving.
What's that?
To do with saving.
Saving. Saving what?
Whether technology can save us. Is that the
Okay.
it's moving towards? No.
So it was a very good guess.
I think it's about how to get a grip on technology
Yes.
before it runs away with itself more than anything. And I thought it was quite interesting because obviously that was written quite early on, so talking about sort of manufacturing and things like that, whereas now technology does feel like it's running away with itself a little bit and it's difficult to keep up, and sort of having that comparison of when it was written to now, I thought that made more relevance that is what it's about. It's
Yeah,
like
I'm just going to
getting a
understand
grip on
people.
it.
Yeah,
Is it how it makes us human?
Yes, very good. So the question concerning technology is literally how it makes one human. So you were on the right path there, David. Now, why would a question concerning technology have any bearing on whether or not we were human? Or anyway, what type of human we would be? Why would it matter?
Because it's our root.
But there's no roots.
It's where we came from.
But there's no origin.
First.
What was that? That's a very
That is a good connection there, actually. Maybe the axe wants
What is technology literally, like grammatically?
tool.
No, grammaticology stands for logic of. And what's the logic of? Techne. So the first thing that Heidegger suggests is that technology is the logic of how things are grasped. And what he says in this piece, in a circuitous way, I will say, he says in this, I feel like I should see more. What he says in this piece, which is very crucial, is that technology has nothing to do with technology itself. That's like in the third paragraph, correct? Bag of tricks. I was going to read you. He says it, it's right here on page 4. Technology is not equivalent to the essence of technology. When we're seeking the essence of tree, we have to become aware that that which pervades every tree as tree is not itself a tree that can be coordinated in terms of any meaning tree. That makes sense to you. The question becomes, why is it that technology dominates this time period? What is it about the logic of Techne that creates a situation so that one is able to do something because you can put things together? You can literally, it's how something's grasped, how it's put together, the how. That we're in an age that is the primary moving feature of the age. That's what he's claiming. That the 20th century and the 21st century primary dynamic is that for some reason things work off of a logic of grasping the out there and bringing it to us, or being pulled out there toward something. He's saying that the logic of being human is the pulling out toward something and the ability for oneself to pull back. And that relationship, not that you just sort of walking along going, yeah, I think I want to join society, you join it. Or I'm not going to be part of society. No, he says in the time period that we're in, for some reason, which we'll get into in a second, we are pulled over there, to the there. We're pulled there. Dasein, Dasein, D-A-S-E-I-N, Dasein, the there. We're pulled there. We're pulled over there. We go over there. We're moving over there. There's no necessary reason, or not an obvious one. We're pulled over there, and we take the there, and we bring it to ourselves. And that relationship of being pulled and taking back, that forms the first part of a discourse. So you're pulled to the horizon of the there, to Dasein, and you're also pulled back. And he says that that is the logic of this age. And that's kind of interesting that it wouldn't be some other form of living. He's not saying this is true for all types of living. He's saying for this time period, the economy, the story, the physics, the life that we have, the science we have, is forcing you to look at the horizon, and that horizon is being pulled back. So always there's a plurality. There's always a plurality of relating. There's no such thing as the singular I, just me, little me. Me is always either relationship myself to myself, Foucault, or what he's saying, more Heidegger is saying, is that there's a logic to the out there, the Dasein, this relationship. So that the logic of the question concerning technology, the first question is, as John was pointing out, what does it mean to be human? But what does it mean to be human, as Gay was pointing out, in relationship to this movement? Because one is being pulled out and also pulling back, and that forms a little tightrope that you can walk on toward the there. As long as the you that's at the other end stays over there. Can you see that? So you're walking very slowly over the bridge to the there, except that there doesn't have an end point. And of course, the you who's on the other shore doesn't either. And Heidegger just couldn't solve that part of it. It really bothered him. Because on the one hand, you have this side, and then you have the entities, and you have the Dasein, and you're being pulled over there. But it's though the world is coming with you. In a certain sense, the world does come with you. You know, wherever you move, the world is moving with you. Yeah, Luke.
How does that relate to this week, last term, Well, you said we can never be there, we can only be here.
Here, now.
Is there any relationship there?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What is that?
Do you remember more than the fifth week? Do you remember what we were reading at that point? Now. That was about Hegel.
Right, okay.
Okay? We'll back up because I can see that that is a confusing aspect. Here's the question that may solve this, that may prequel the answer. Okay, so to your question. The question is, how do you know you're right when you're understanding reality? How do you get it? And Hegel's answer was always that whatever system of logic you have, you can't have more than one. You only have one system of logic. You can't have 50 million ways of looking at the same problem, because otherwise, then whoever is right is determined militarily. Because whoever has the most might will always be right. Because if you have all these different competing views, then whoever gets somebody to shut up and the other person can speak is going to be the one whose views win. And Hegel's saying, I mean, while that may be true militarily, and we know that it is true in a lot of ways, what is not true is you can't have a military come in and say, that number 3, this thing here, or, you know, the famous George Orwell, how many fingers? Do you know this part of George Orwell's story in Animal Farm? How many fingers? And you were meant to say, how many fingers are up here? Not a trick question. 4. Excellent. Okay, but there are some situations that you might be made to say 3, or you might be made to say 5. What are those situations? What would a situation be if I'm saying how many fingers?
Surely it depends on how many fingers you hold up.
I'm holding up these fingers, and someone says to you, how many fingers are up here? What would make you say 3 or 5? Or
Someone
none?
else's will.
Someone else's will. So someone grabs your child, has a gun to the head, and says, if you say 4 fingers, I'm going to blow the head off of your kid. What would you say?
3.
You wouldn't go, actually, there really are 4 fingers here. I mean, you know, I realize that. You know, like, yeah. What Hegel is saying is that there's only one reality. And if someone comes with a gun and wants you to say it otherwise, that's just not accurate. That's not logic. So what he's saying is that there's only one reality, and that reality is called the universe, or the universal, totality. And there's no getting outside of the totality, which all of these people agree with. There's no getting outside of this universe. By the way, did you know that they found something like 100 more galaxies, or 100,000 more galaxies? Did you hear about this? 100 more thousand Earths? It's fantastic. Anyway, so you never get outside the galaxy. You never get outside the universe. There's no outside in that sense. You can't step outside of air. There's no outside. So what Hegel's saying is that that has to be taken as a given. And if that's taken as a given, then the only way to understand reality is dialectically. And that is to say, all that there is, plus all that there's not, taken together, sublated, exploded into the synthesis, comes back around, forms the basis, right? Remember that famous dialectical move? Okay. So, and what he's saying is that you start with the here, right here. And you say, I can't discuss this until I have a relationship of something against this here. And the against would be the antithesis, or the not here. The only way to go from here to there, you can't go from here to there if you're always in the here. You have to be able to be sublated, synthesized, shot out of a cannon, create a new platform, as it were. Otherwise, you're always in the here and can't do anything about it. Now, further to that, Hegel's saying that no matter where you go, though, the here is always with you. So you could go there, but you're bringing the here along. Make sense? Yeah? Follow that?
Yeah, follow that. It's just how that ties into...
Okay, so what Hegel is saying is that dialectic creates a situation where you must go where you must have that kind of relationship between thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and so on. What Heidegger is saying is that you don't need to go to the Dasein. You don't need to go to the there. It's a relation. There's like a projection that's thrown out, like a rope that's thrown out, except it's a rope that looks like a plane. It goes toward the there. And that plane that is being thrown out, you're not literally going to the there. You're not walking because you'll not get there. The there evaporates. What's happening is that you're here, you see the there, you have your projection, or starts with an A, started the course off with it. Attitude. You throw your attitude out there, and you begin to build something with the there. People have often called that little version of a charisma, by the way. But this is way of throwing something out. The voice, where are you? Ventriloquism. You're throwing it out, and it allows you as a result not to kind of leave your body, as it were, and go to the there. What happens if, like, your skin could be shed, and the inside of you, the attitude of you, and I'm not talking about souls here, I'm talking about just some sort of cyborg thing. You just have the one you here, you can clone yourself, and this other you goes on this sort of wide path. So you have this attitude that's going, and he's saying that Hegel is not right about how this is set up. He's not, the reason, what happens with Hegel is that he sets up this question of how you understand meaning by setting up the dialectic in this kind of closed totality, or even if it's an open totality relationship. You have this totality, and what Heidegger is saying is that you have this, let's say, surface, famous surface question. You have this surface that's being created by the throwing out of here to there. To not just any old there, not just a halfway there, but Dasein. Dasein is kind of like the societal meaning. You know, it's like going for what does society expect out of you? That's the there that he's talking about. What are you normally meant to be doing? That's your there. And you can be fighting it, you can be going toward it, you can be boxing with it. It doesn't matter. That's the societal horizon that begins to pull you in that direction. And as an artist, you pull it back, or as anybody, you pull it back. But in the Fluxus terms, that's when you start to learn how to play, malleable, how to malleate, what's the right word? How to manipulate this relationship, this attitude that you're throwing. You're going to find out that that's what we also are doing. That's what is also being done with the quanta. We'll get there. We'll get there, I promise. You will find this very understandable. Okay, so now he's saying that the question concerning technology then is based on this relationship of what is to be human, is based on this relationship of how one deals with technology, is based on, in fact, the very question of what is tech, literally, that technology is techne. Just remember techne, gathering. The art of gathering, the art of saying, you know, I think I'm going to pick that little thing up. I see this thing on the floor here. It's just, could be a crud of something, but maybe it's it looks like a petal of a flower, or maybe it's a dead insect, and I'm going to do something with this. I don't know what yet, but I'll do something with it, including throwing it away. Okay, now that you know how to gather, literally gather, but what's being gathered is not just these little crumbs, although that's part of it. You're gathering also Dasein. Just keep remembering, just repeat it. Dasein, Dasein, like Dalek, Dasein. Okay, you're in the relationship to Dasein. So the first point about the question concerning technology, after we get through this very basic thing, that it has to do with being human, that it has to do with, you know, having this projection, that the first main thing that you need to understand is that when the there is so profound that you can't escape it, then the techne and you're dealing with it, can collapse on you. So he gives the example of the atom bomb, though we can come up with other examples, far more, or as ferocious at least, as that. War is a perfect example of the there that you can't escape. It's everywhere. It's not out there, it's everywhere. So he's saying that technology offers you a way to get a certain kind of distance. Again, it's the self to the self. It offers you a distancing. But if the there is so profoundly aggressive that it permeates everything, a smell, you can't get away from it, that the there is here, then there's the collapse between the here and there, and that's basically death, or no creativity, or not going to work, or figure out how to escape, any of these kind of things. Let's say you're living in an environment where there's gangs, but somebody else is living in a completely, like, I don't know, happy, there's no gang. Or take the terrible shootings that happened at the Sandy Hook in the States. People were not remotely thinking that they'd send their child off to school and they would be dead because some maniac would come in, which they now have found that his mother was part of a group called there's a name that they give them, but it's basically people that believe in the end of the world. And she had been stockpiling lots of ammunition to defend herself against the end of the world, which was happening on like the 19th or 21st of December or whatever. There's a whole relationship between this kind of very odd, psychotic relationship to this question of the end of the world and the right to hold the arms and so on. But I'm mentioning this because if you believe that the end of the world is nigh, if you really, really believe that, if you really think Dasein is creeping towards you and there's nowhere to escape, then you do end up in these psychosis environments. That is a psychosis. And the question then again becomes, is the second point, how do you know when it's psychosis? And how do you know when in fact it's happening? How did, I don't know, is there anybody in this room that actually thought that the end of the world was coming? Okay, and there might be, how do you know you're right? It's ludicrous on some level to think that the end of the world was coming, that somebody in Nostradamus or whenever it was wrote that, December 19th, 2012, there would be the end of the world. But what makes your calculation correct and this other person's calculation incorrect? How do you get to know that the Dasein is what your attitude is sorting it out as being? So how do you know it's not just some fantasy? How do you know it's not some whim? So what Heidegger says is the first thing you need to understand about technology is that it's the act of gathering. It gives you the logic to gather, but what are you gathering? And how do you know when you're gathering something that the gathering actually is real? And so what he does is he develops the next word that you need to know called enframing. I don't know how far you got in the article on this, but enframing. And the enframing is the logical terrain that is set up between the entity and the there, the little b being and the big B being. Little b being here, big B being, big B, capital B is what I mean, capital B being small b entities, Dasein entities, that this relationship creates a corral, creates an enframing. What Deleuze will develop to call it a plane, like a surface, a plane of immanence, a plane that continues to spread, a plane that has abilities to move. And Hegel would at this point be like going, losers all of you, because you're out of the loop of the universal. So the very first thing you need to get a sense of in the Heideggerian move is the way in which this Dasein starts to operate on creating the enframing of the environment that you're connected with. And that this is not just your opinion, but it is the reality, even though you can't see it as, even though it may not be obvious in the sense that there's actually a tank in the street. It may not be obvious at that level. That doesn't mean you're still, that doesn't mean that you're free. Doesn't mean that you don't have any issues. This enframing that you're dealing with, this discourse, captures you in such a way that you must respond, even if you could care less about it. You are caught. It's like being tattooed. You're caught in a mid-run, and it's a tattoo on you. You can't rip it off. You're stuck. Questions about it. It's very important that you get this point here. So in other words, I could be let's say, I mean, only because I'm so let's say in tune right now with American politics, but I guess I won't use American. Let's use Cameron as an example. The lovely Cameron, the lovely David Cameron. You know, he doesn't. Let's say he doesn't see the racism. He doesn't see how that operates. He doesn't seem to think that people are legitimately troubled by something that he doesn't see how that racism is setting itself up. Well, how is it that one can see it? Partly because one might be the object of it, and partly because this enframing environment that gets established is invisible to those that are not having to bear the brunt of it. So questions on, for example, questions around, this was part of the problem trying to find the Stephen Lawrence murderers, because there was I mean, apart from the fact that there's a very strong argument that said that the police were being racist in themselves, that they simply just weren't looking. But how do you look for something that is not visible in the way in which people could say, well, I feel this racism. I'm being, Freud would say, I'm being interpolated. I'm being brought into a way in which my identity is being sucked in to a certain position, and there's nothing that I can do about it except get sucked in. You're being pulled to the Dasein. And you can pull back. People do pull back. But it might, in certain cases, take all the energy you have, while someone else doesn't have any of that relationship. They have they're just skipping along. How are you hearing this? Am I asking you if I'm clear? People can say yes, but how are you actually hearing it? What are you hearing? Simon?
I'm just wondering, again, coming back to this idea of psychosis, and you're saying that when the framing is invisible to people who are not directly affected by it, that means they're sort of like outside the discourse of the normal. And so from a point of view of the normal, it would appear as a sort of psychosis, would it?
Right, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But how do you know when that is psychosis?
We'll get there. We'll get there. We'll get to the how do you know.
Right.
But can you repeat that, because I think it's really important. I don't know if people heard you as clearly as you said. Could you just repeat what you just said?
I think I can't remember. I think it was something about when you step outside the discourse of the normal, when it's only you're maybe in a minority and the framing is invisible. You can see it, but nobody else can see it. But the discourse of the normal doesn't see it.
The discourse of the normal doesn't see it.
So
right.
And then the question was, if you're within the discourse of normal, how do you see it as just psychosis? And the wider question of when is it psychosis and when isn't it psychosis? Because that's an issue which you raised as an earlier point.
Yeah. People get that question? Yeah? What were you going to say?
No, I think so. So is it about changing the conditions of how you look at it? I'm just thinking about trying to move that argument on.
Yeah, it is the only...
Is it like...
So taking racism, for example,
yeah,
as a tangible, as one way that you're, your relation to cameras, if that's not being...
I'm not saying the camera.
No, I understand, but you're saying that you're using that as a tangible...
Yeah.
Not necessarily... Well, right, let's just
And
say
ideological
Prime Minister.
decision. Yeah, Prime Minister that looks
is it then
suspiciously like David Cameron.
To illustrate that point, is it then about changing the conditions so that that then does become visible?
Yes, in part it is about changing the conditions so that it becomes visible, but the real question then is how can we talk about it without relating to the eye? I mean, like the eyeball, like visual. Is it possible to have something that, see in English, the word visible, the word I can see this, I can't see this, you don't see it, but I do see it, relies on the problem of sight, actually. But as we started the class out, it was about attitude. And the attitude is the seeing. What I'm trying to get you to think about doing is think that your eyeball is actually your ear. See with your ear. See if you can try that. See if that even makes any sense. See if you can, by what I mean is, can you perceive using an ear?
Through hearing.
Well, I guess. Since
Yeah,
I wasn't
that's
saying
what you mean,
that's
isn't it? Yeah,
the
you
ear.
know,
Head.
some other way, yeah.
No. Is there yeah?
Sorry, is it like an inkling, like an instinct? You just have a feeling that something...
Okay, could be, but we're talking about power relations. So it's not just an inkling. You're going to be feeling it like a heat wave or something. It's going to be, pretty strong. The question is, how come other people either willfully refuse or even can willfully refuse? How is it that some people are not part of the racism, of the bad, the wrong end of the gun on racism? How is that possible?
Because the Dasein defines the attitude.
Good. And how does this Dasein do that?
Because it's societally conditioned.
Okay, but that gets back now to psychologism, so you got to be careful about that. But you're so warm. It gets back to psychologism, which then gets back to the individual consciousness. And let's start again. So the individual is on the shore, and there, the Dasein is over there. Now, therefore, the actual human thing, the actual human being, the being of human, is this relationship between being on the shore and being out there. That whole bit is what is human, is what is your human, your own human. That whole bit stretches, that whole thing. So it's not just that you are seeing the there and then, being drawn into it. It's that the whole bit establishes this entity. Now, why is it that it's pulling, let's say, Anna and me in, but it's not going to be pulling Dane in, for example? How does that happen? How is it that the Dasein can kind of go around selectively going, no, I think I'll have you, but I'm not going to be... How does that happen?
Isn't it down to the individual, though, and how they... I was going to say how they see, but that would be how they listen, how they respond, their
Part of it
attitude.
is, but if you're caught in the tidal wave of Dasein, it doesn't matter if you go, like I was saying, it doesn't matter if you go, if the person's saying, and how many fingers, and they've got your kid with a gun to the head. You're not going to go, well, look, honestly, there really are 4. I know the game you're playing, but, I'm going to say 4. I'm going to say 3 because we knew, You're not going to do that. You're just going to say, oh, there's 3. It's like, why? What? Yeah, Simon.
Isn't that's quite an extreme example of it, when you enter one scenario or
yeah, trying
more.
Extreme.
But in the normal scenario, aren't there multiple Daseins? In fact, you're looking here and there, and you could be pulled in any of those directions because there's lots of counter-discursive elements going on. Why is it just one place where you might be pulled to rather than a choice?
So why is there? Okay, so can you develop that a little bit further? Because Hegel's point, getting back to Luke's question, was that there can only be one reality. There can't be a whole zillion bits of reality. Otherwise, you never have universality. You can't have ethics being different in one place and something else in some other place. So Hegel's going on and on. He develops this entire system that we banged on again all last semester. The one thing he's trying to say is there cannot be 100,000 different Daseins running around. You know, there can't be all these different Daseins pulling people in all different directions. Because if there were all these different Daseins doing this, then there'd be chaos.
They have to be there within Hegel.
What?
Within Hegel, they have to be there within the dialectic somewhere, because you've got one defined something, and then everything else which is not that something. So it's something and not something. So all those counter things must be somewhere in the not something, surely. Aren't they bundled up together within that dialectic?
But, yes, but as a result, there's no outside of that, let's say, bundle.
Yeah.
Okay, and if you're inside with the millions of different bundles, then they're not fully formed, and so they don't count strong enough. They're not really full concepts. But they're not universals then at that point, they're only abstractions. So he's saying that, but what Heidegger, from at least what you're suggesting, is that there are all these different worlds, and that one is being negotiated through a whole series of worlds. And he's basically saying, what happened to the society where we went from the Hegelian moment of the universal to this whole bunch of worlds going on, where you're being negotiated and where you have a relationship to that negotiation? What happens in that relationship? And Heidegger is not going to say there's a billion, zillion different worlds. He's going to say Dasein is the there, not a there. It's the there. It's the thing that creates the status quo. It's the thing that creates, you know, otherwise his argument would be, and I think it's not unsound, you would never be able to have civilization. You'd have just so many different Daseins running around. I mean, if you really had, let's say, democracy of Daseins, so no one Dasein was more powerful than the next Dasein, as it were, and you could kind of like go in a candy shop and go, well, I'll have some of this Dasein and a little bit of that Dasein. But he's not saying that. He's saying you're being pulled into something that you simply must react to. And if you don't react to it, you will be pulled into it. And you don't really have a choice to say, well, you know, you're going to be pulled into it. Clovis, did you have a, were you going to say something? No, you're just moving. Okay, sorry.
But does it connect with power and hierarchy then?
It totally connects with power and hierarchy.
So people's Dasein depends on their relationship with power and hierarchy.
Okay, but then that relationship of power and hierarchy is in fact the Dasein.
That was
Yes, yes, yes.
That relationship of power and hierarchy is then the Dasein.
Is what it is. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so then suddenly, yeah?
So the shooter who has a kid and showing us finger, he
Yeah.
creates Dasein for us.
He creates the
Yeah,
Dasein,
because
yes.
he has the power.
Yes.
We basically then we need to respond
And,
to him.
and since that Dasein is absolute Dasein,
Yeah.
there's no negotiation. That is the basis of a fascistic version.
And is there something to do with distance in there? So to take that example, that is a very close, you are
Excellent.
almost at Dasein. And in racism, some people are further away from it. Would that be?
Yeah, so there's something about distance. Good. Can you push that a little bit? So that's a very close distance. There's there's
Is
a
it
proximity there.
Stepping outside of.
You can't step outside.
Right, okay.
Okay, there's no stepping outside of the Dasein relationship. You can't step outside of it. But there's something about, it's like very Zen. How?
It's in the doing then, what you're doing between here and the Dasein. You dictate what's happening.
So close. Yeah, there's.
This is what I'm hearing, I'm not entirely sure, but is it the idea of beauty is in the eye of the beholder? So there's a universal concept of beauty, but my version of beauty is very different from, say, Den's version of beauty.
No, I mean, that is true if you're following sort of a Kantian, Hegelian relationship to universals.
Right, okay. So on the other side, could it be a self-fulfilling prophecy? You go looking for evidence to support, or Dasein to support your own psychosis?
No. It's almost like the Kierkegaard situation where one trembles without thinking about trembling. You're not going to be thinking about your relationship to Dasein. You're in this relationship. Heidegger's making a few points. The point of this part of the conversation, this part of the semi-lecture, is that Dasein is not something you choose. You're not choosing, I think I'll have that Dasein today and tomorrow I'll have another one. It's, you're in this relationship. You have no choice about the fact that you breathe air, for example. You have no choice about that. You can't decide, well, I think today I'm going to just breathe carbon monoxide. It's not going to work. You're in the Dasein, and that there's the question then becomes, how does that Dasein get enframed? How does the enframing establish itself?
Well, you said that attitude is a secret.
Yes.
So when we realize the secret, that's when we form a Dasein. Is that?
That's when you form a relationship to the Dasein. And let's say an awake relationship to the Dasein.
Then you realize that there is a Dasein.
That you realize that there is a Dasein.
Is this similar to Kant's idea of immaturity? So you're within this discourse which is going on, you have to find that exit to it, is it?
Yes. The only difference, though, is that one has to be careful not to blame the victim who doesn't get away from the racism. You've got a pack of animals attacking this girl on the bus. You know, she's caught in the cultural environment of profound misogyny, where, I mean, actually, what I find remarkable that the story is going on, it's just disgusting, but what's also equally remarkable and horrible is that there's the exact same story that's going on in the US and Ohio, and there is no reporting on it at all. And not only that, the football coach, it was a football team that attacked this poor young woman, the football coach said that that's what boys do on the football team. That was his response. And there was no response to that response. Now, I think it's phenomenal that in India or in Delhi that you have this response. But the response, so the question is, how is it you have two absolutely similar scenarios where a woman is gang raped in the most brutal, torturous way? In one situation, everybody goes, well, you know, that's sort of what happens. You know, if you didn't wear a short dress, that was part of the other thing, then, you know, it wouldn't have been happening. You know, it's like this kind of, versus an entire country that's being ripped apart over this. So what? It's a good example in terms of how the common sense forms the Dasein about what it is that is the horizon of where the society says that's how these enframings get set up. And in order that one gets problematized and the other one doesn't, in these two examples, something else is going on. And the question becomes, what's the else that's going on? Jude, did you want to say anything on that? No, you're Anna. Jude behind you.
I don't know if it's kind of revealing self as well, sort of like whether you go and keep it Dasein or not, whether it's like a force almost that pulls you to it.
Yeah, I really feel like this is beginning to sound like Star Wars.
A revelation almost that actually, is this the direction you want to go in or not? And then that's when you learn something about it and then you take that step back.
Yes, yes.
So is it involved this personal will?
You say that louder?
Is it involved this personal will? Do we have the...
It is, but it is, but I'm talking about how someone is silenced, not how somebody is fighting back. I realize that we do want to do the fight back, so I'm not, you know, but I'm talking about how the silencing happens. The reason I want you to get a sense of that is because that's the first form of difference. That's this way in which silence is going to operate. It's the first form. That was too, I jumped too far. I mean, we've got to get this part down first. So let me start again. You have the dots. Let me go back to what Luke was saying. Now, Luke, can you rephrase your remark? Because I think that needs to just, like, can you rephrase it in such a way that it doesn't have a sight as an eyeball, like either beauty is in the eye of the beholder or anything. Like, there's no relationship to an eye, eyeball. There's no
perceptual awareness.
Yeah. So if we're going to talk about perception, the perception cannot involve seeing, perceiving, squinting, reading. No semiotics, no linguistics. Can you perceive without using those terms?
Can't it just be a feeling?
It can be a feeling. And it's going to be more than a feeling, because if you're just walking around going, you know, I think that, you know, the world is pretty racist, and, you know, wow, and here I'm now getting attacked by a bunch of idiots on the basis of skin color or whatever, and, yeah, I guess I'm right. It's really, yeah, that's not, it's not going to work like that. You're not going to be in that kind of, you know, doolally headspace. You're going to be pulled into it. You're going to be brought into it, and you're going to feel it, not just, gee, I feel like
so it's emotional experience almost, rather than sort of a visual thing. It's
Visceral.
yeah,
It's visceral.
Yeah.
Yes. Not visceral.
Not gut instinct as
Yeah.
such,
But see, that just sounds so woolly and airy-fairy, and, you know, I say this with love, but, you know, to the airy-fairy
No,
world.
but then that ties in directly with what you asked us to do earlier, which was close your eyes and you just feel something
Yes.
visceral. And the first thing I always feel is this or this.
Yeah.
I always want to throw up for some reason when people ask me to do that. And,
Huh.
and I don't know why. Yeah. It's here or it's
Lay on
here.
the couch here.
Yeah.
No, but it just, you know, the question is, where do you see the thing that's getting pulled? I'm not asking you to be completely schizophrenic and just sort of step outside yourself. But in a certain sense, I am asking you a little bit to, in this kind of lay sense of schizophrenia. Do you know schizophrenia basically is the inability to control all the different voices in your head? Which is not to say that people don't have voices in their head. Almost everyone has a voice in their head. If you're suffering with schizophrenia, it's your inability to, it's like personality disorder. It's not like, or multiple personality disorder. I mean, everybody has different personalities that they trot out depending on which situation they're in. It's only when you're really terrible at organizing them that you have a syndrome called multiple personality disorder, you know, or someone actually pops up called Eva or something, and then, you know, I should come to you, hi, I'm Eva today, you know, and, you know, you're like, no, actually you're not. Oh, yeah, I am. You know, and a whole different person comes in. I'm not talking about that level of psychosis. I'm talking about this thing that you're dealing with that pulls you in so that you are no longer yourself. You're brought in the closest proximity. You're brought to right up to Dasein. So you lose yourself. So the self, the making of self requires Dasein, but it requires a distance from Dasein. Otherwise, you can't make the self, is what Heidegger is getting at here. And he's saying that this time period is particularly established to do that. Other time periods might have different other rules of the game, different regimes of power that go on. But this version, it manifests itself in Enframing. And I said to you earlier that the relationship between closing down, or the silence of the silencing that creates the difference, once that difference is swallowed by the Dasein, there is no difference. There's only the, you know, kind of the sound of the monitor going, that's it. Now, once you get that close, there's no difference. So, difference in the Heideggerian move is that which is able to keep its distance, but at the same time, in keeping the distance, it has no voice. Yeah.
It's the opposite of agency.
It's the opposite of agency, but it creates agency. I wouldn't say it's opposite, like a thesis antithesis. It's not about agency is really what's the point. It's neither agency or not agency. It's the Higgs boson, it's the dot particle. Okay. Whoa. Not too bad.
I keep thinking of if there was a rattlesnake somewhere in the room rattling,
Yes.
would we see it with our ears? Is that what we were talking about?
Yes, that's probably a good way to do it.
We'd all be compelled to look for it.
Or compelled to know that it's there. You'd be forced to know that it's there. You might not be compelled to look for it because you might be frozen with fear.
We might leave.
You know.
Yeah. I'd be compelled to leave the room.
You might be compelled, but you'd be compelled to pay attention. Do people meditate? Is there anybody in this room that actually does, actually meditation? Like a form of meditation where you meditate by hearing, like the sound. Like if you just, yes.
I do Iyengar yoga, and at the end of the practice, you lie down and completely relax. And sometimes what happens is you get, you let go of stuff, and you just realise your muscle and tissue and bone, bits of brain, stuff,
Yes.
rather than you.
Because a different way of putting that point is that your memory is not located in here. Your memory is located throughout your body. So when you start to let go of things, as it were in this yoga practice you're talking about, when you start emptying your mind in this sense, then you can feel the memory slipping away. It's not like you have like, a little part of, here's where I fed the cat, here's where I dealt with the Christmas dinner. It's not like that, but you have the residue of memory in your body. But what I was meaning to get to on this meditation thing is that if you meditate and you keep your eyes shut, or whatever you want to do, you can stare into the future if it makes you uncomfortable. Can you hear that buzz?
Yeah.
Now, in meditation, you wouldn't name it as a buzz. You would just note it. In fact, people that teach this kind of thing, they'll say things like, there's a buzz. There's something. But you can hear it. And I don't want to name that thing. I don't want to say, well, it's got a certain clarity to it, or it sounds like an A minus, or whatever, A major, or something. I just want to say that's what it is. That is seeing your ear, because you're not naming it, but you're noting it. Literally, like in music, noting it. You're taking note. You're tuning to it.
Is it like when you actually see when you're drawing, you don't name what it is that you're drawing?
Yes, that's what we're getting at here.
Yeah.
So a work of art is based on that form of seeing,
Yeah.
which has pretty much nothing to do with seeing. It has nothing to do with perception. It's nothing to do with that side of it. Nothing to do with the old forms of perception. So the second point that is this making sense now? So is it making any sense? A little bit. So when you hear that buzz noise and you don't name it, there's an annoying buzz. I must find it. I must kid it. You just hear that thing. There's another noise, a little rattle type thing. Right on cue. Now you could say to yourself, but that's a car going by, so you've already named it. So the thing is how to do the noise game without literally coming up with, that's blah, blah, blah. And so that game is what he's talking about. This kind. That's the Dasein. The Dasein's pulling you in without naming anything. We're getting away from logos. We're getting away from sort of the Western form of a certain kind of thinking, a certain kind of being. He's trying to talk about this relation. It's a very tough thing to grasp. So the first point was about technology having to do with the essence of technology. Technology has to do with the logic of Techne, of how things are grasped. Well, you're one of the things that's being grasped, being pulled. And then the question that Simon raised and that Luke was echoing as well is, well, how do you deal with all these, how do you know if you're in one Dasein or you've got several thousand Daseins? How do you deal with your different Daseins? Like, you wake up in the morning and go, okay, got the Daseins out here. No, it doesn't work like that. You're saying one Dasein, pulled in. They form these discourses that overlap, like concentric circles. Some of them are overlapping. So somebody could be in a racist discourse, could be in a misogynist discourse, could be in a, poor discourse. They could all overlap, and it would be a tough moment to get away from those overlapping scenarios Now, he's not talking about like different levels of, you know, how many levels of oppression you can, you know, count yourself having. So that you're working class and you're black and you're, you know, Jewish and you're lesbian and, you know, whatever, you know, it's like these 75 levels of oppression. He's talking about, it's just these different forms of these ways in which you're made into what will be called a differand, a different thing. And that different thing doesn't exist in the same way that a something exists. And sometimes you can be a something, and other times you're a different. You're sucked in. Now there are people in the society, I suppose maybe William, and you know, people that go by one name, Kate, you know, maybe they're never part of these different discourses, I don't know. But it's about regimes of power and how they circulate, and how the circulation of the power relationships form wider parts of the enframing. So in the second section of this question concerning technology, he begins to ask the question, well, how do you know when something's authentic? Now, the thing about Heidegger is he's always asking about authenticity, because he's fascist, so he's looking for the true. You have to be, you know, well, wrong to say he's fascist. It's very bad. But he is looking for a certain form of authenticity, which you could read, and I'd like to read it as universal, so rather than just having a core. And he's trying to ask the question, how is it that something can be brought into a discourse, or is you're not outside of any discourses? How are you dealing with this discourse where you end up creating a new discourse? How do you break out of racism? I mean, how do you break out of, you know, like, you know, feminism, for example? You know, it's not like a exact strategy. You just do X, Y, and Z, and it just poof, it works. You know, it still doesn't work because you get pulled in. I don't know how many people have ever been at meetings where suddenly you might be talking and then you're just you're turned into a different. And just suddenly you're just not that person who's giving the speech. You're something else. You're this dot on the wall. Anybody who's an immigrant, anybody who falls into these categories where you're not the primary vocal character is going to be in that position at some point. Sorry, it's going to happen. And so what Heidegger is talking about here is the dialectic cannot explain that form of identity. Because identity, from the point of view of the dialectic, is all that there is and all that there's not. There's antithesis and thesis. One is sublated into the other, forms the negation, has this question of agency. But what it's not talking about is the way in which the difference creates the full picture. So what we're going to see when we get to it in number 3, on identity and difference, when he starts to literally go, he basically says that in Hegel, A equals A. And you think to yourself, okay, that's kind of self-evident. A, the letter A equals the letter A. Okay, that seems like they're identical. They're identical, they match, they're an A and A. He says, no, that's not the way to look at this. Heidegger says what you need to understand is that the equal sign actually means how something is brought together. So A brings this other A together, and they're held together by the equal sign. So identity is a relationship that works when, for whatever reasons, this side and that side create a cohesion, and they stick together. The Dasein and the entity and the little b being are held together, but they're not so close that they collapse onto each other, because other than you don't have any form of identity and you have no form of difference. So the first point of today's complicated lecture is simply trying to draw your attention to this techne that creates the distance. So the third point for today, so we have the first one about technology not having an essence. You have the second one about dealing with the way in which that creates this relationship. And the third one that you need to get a sort of need to get a sense of how this operates is that there's an art to how one gathers, how one grasps. And that's the next tricky bit. So Techne doesn't just mean gathering, it means the art of gathering. It means kind of knowing what to pick out of the vast array of things that you can choose, and the fact that it'll stick together. So the Techne is a very specific word being used here. Literally it means the art of grasping. So technology is literally the environment around which that art of grasping is the primary feature of our society. So the art of grasping anything, knowledge, identity, money, there's a way into it that requires a certain form of, I'm going to say a certain form of walking. I'm going to call it like that, a certain form of, next part of understanding where you see is your legs. You're going to see through your legs. You're going to get a sense of how, if you're understanding this is now a map, this is a kind of a terrain of sorts, not one you can literally stand on, because it's invisible, it has no weight, it has no space, it has no speed, but it's established through this relationship, then the art of grasping is an art of understanding how movement works into this ability to grasp in order to make something stick. That's making any sense? Like,
so it's,
yeah.
It's about wandering as opposed to.
But it's a very specific
walking.
wandering. It's not wandering, you know, with a goal in mind.
No.
It's not telos.
This is where the flaneur idea.
Yes, this is where the flaneur idea comes into. Yes. This is the basis of the next wave of the Enlightenment, the New Enlightenment. Yeah. What were you going to say?
No, I was thinking about the Enlightenment.
Yeah, because the whole flaneur thing becomes part of the feature of the Fluxus moment. So we're kind of gone around, I don't know if this is just, but yeah, what I'm hoping you're hearing today, just to get yourself back in shape, you know, is that we've got this thing on the table which is challenging the methodology that is inside of all of you, the Hegelian methodology. It's very difficult to get rid of it. You'd be amazed. It just pops up in the most strangest of times. Now, maybe we shouldn't at the end get away from it, but we're going to give it our best shot. Now, how are we doing for time? Because I want to show you one other thing. Are we okay? What time is it?
It's a 7:15.
Oh, good. Here's where this is leading on a visual level. I hope that this can make sense to you. Okay. I will send you this as well, but of course you'll get the whole thing. Do we have internet here?
Should be wireless in here. Yeah.
Settings.
Okay, this is one of the places that it's moving toward this. If I have to get online. Hello. Okay. Okay, and what I'm showing you here is where this leads. I've sent you the English version, so you don't have to worry about it. Okay. There is a very big event happening in Barcelona, which is dealing with sort of the next stage of what we're talking about in terms of art forms. And you'll see, I'll send it to you. But what they're doing is they're using the screen as though it were the enframement that we're talking about today from the mobile apps. And the kind of work that's being done, you know, apart from these kind of images, there's the Bjork, form, but we're going to have this is one of the pieces we have on our course outline. Now, what is being presented here in terms of artwork is how to begin to map the relationship of the entity to Dasein. And this map doesn't have edges to it. It's an enframing. But it's not an enframing in the normal sense of having a frame. It's an enframing in the sense that, I mean, what you probably can't see it on this image, but it's lots of people, I mean, it's some sort of art drawing that this Jody Zellin has created. And what they're trying to show is how the surface of anything, including of the Dasein, has a thickness, has a certain relationship, even though literally there's no ground, there's no real surface, there's no anything. I just want you to see this for a second, for a moment, just so you get a sense of where some of this goes. I think this is interesting. So there's a guy that who is worth. This is a blog, by the way, that is almost there. So, yeah, well, okay. So, here's an example of someone who is developing the question of how to see with your fingers. Like, da-da, where is it? Oh, yeah. playing apps. It's playing on the iPhones. Obviously, it's quite old technology. Do you make anything of this, or do you think it's like, so what? Is it a so what moment? Or is that doing anything? Do you see, can anybody see if there's a link between what we were just talking about in terms of the surface and what's going on there? He's claiming this to be art. Just throwing into that. Anybody have a reaction to that? Yeah, okay. Oh no, you're just moving. Sorry. Michaela, what do you think right there? No comment. So this really just is not going to inspire anybody at the moment. Was it music?
It was good. It was kind of exchange, touched into sound. That was kind of odd. And yeah, because it was touching.
Yeah.
Playing was an action that requires
Something.
contact, some sort of, and the contact was there, but it wasn't the contact that I would expect to be. Let's say.
Yeah, because his notion of touch has to do with vibration.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to do with actual touching. Therefore, the thing he's touching is a screen. The screen that he's touching isn't real. Nothing was real about that in the let's say the usual sense of reality. So to sort of deal with that, one has to get a sense of what is going on. One way to get a sense of it, I'm not saying you have to do this, but is to get to see why it is that the Heideggerian move brings one to this kind of expression. Now you may find this like, well, that's where we're going. Let's run back to Hegel, but you need to get a sense of this way in which different forms of translations of this Dasein, this relation between the entity on the shore and the out there, creates this surface. Any more questions about this? I feel like
I was just thinking with that.
narrow eyebrow moment happening here.
There's a danger that the technology becomes the end, or the technology as an end becomes through a viewer, through listening.
Yeah.
That sort of takes over from the technology as a means.
So if you were Robert Mathy doing this, do you think that would be a very different question around art than if you're sitting here in the room? Like if you're looking at a painting, you could conceivably have an interesting reaction that would enliven your view of art. But in this situation, it's more like torture. Well, not torture, but something that's difficult, because it's kind of like the so what moment.
Maybe it's the
isn't it?
technology of.
Sorry, go on. Yeah. Maybe.
I was just going to say, maybe it's that the technology of YouTube and the technology of phones and all of those things makes us reflect on that more than the actual process. So if we were listening to it in that way, then it would be a very different experience.
Right. So if you sat
if it was, yeah. So perhaps it's the act of seeing that is very difficult for us, because seeing is linked more with our Hegelian perception of things.
So wouldn't it be fair to say that if something worked as a work of art, one should be brought into the art? It should have the function of Dasein art. It should pull you in. And if it's not doing that,
It's not working.
it's not working.
And I think it might be the environment that...
So easy to go down that path. Yeah, go on.
The different things pull different people in.
Okay, but now we're back to Luke's original question. What happens if it's in the eye of the beholder?
What's he doing which is particularly relevant to Dasein in a way which another work of art isn't? You could say of anything, if it draws you in, then it's a work of art, or however you might want to define it. So what is it, which I didn't pick up from that bit of film, what is it particularly about that which relates to what Heidegger said?
Well, I'm trying to see if you can visually not necessarily using your eyes, but visually enter the relationship between being in one place and throwing yourself or being scooped into another place. And that relationship, I'm trying a new technique of lecturing and seeing whether it's working. It may not be working. I may have to resort back to my old forms. But what I'm trying to do is get you to see, I mean, as in feeling, hearing, you know, listening, the way in which a surface gets established as a route, R-O-U-T-E, as a map, as a landscape. Because what the people, not Heidegger, but later on with Deleuze, Lyotard, a lot of the different artists that we'll be looking at, Jim Dine, or whatever, they start talking about this as a viral landscape. And the viralness of something is what I'm trying to get you to think about. But first you have to think about how the landscape itself gets established, about how this relationship literally starts from here to there and creates this path.
So you're saying we've got to have the video to sort of be in it, to feel it, to feel what he's doing?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that at the moment, that kind of work is one example of something that's going as, you know, new art.
I've been thinking to myself, what would happen instead of those things he had, the sonic thing he had on his finger, he had brushes and kind of thinking to myself, how would I write it then if we were just doing that on the canvas? And it kind of makes me the distance to there. That's what it is, I think.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it lies. Because we have no yet connection to any of that. We don't know what it is, basically, whatsoever. But we somehow have so much connection to, let's say, painting, and let's say something that is that we're much more closer to with the painting. Painting is much more closer to
Although if I were watching you paint, it would be about, you know, as thrilling as watching paint dry, you know. Like, you know what I mean? I said it very
But almost, wouldn't it work, would it also possibly work better or be easier to be drawn in if you didn't see the visual, if you were only hearing it?
Yeah.
So what you have is the outcome, but you're not watching the process.
Yeah.
But then you wouldn't understand.
But then you'd understand it on that other sort of level. Because otherwise it's like you're trying to decode it in a semiotic manner. You're trying to read what it's doing, or when if you just heard the sound, you'd feel it in that other way. Maybe.
We're there, but so not there. So now here's what I'm going to suggest for the thing, because I think that this pulled you in a direction that was helpful, but not as helpful as I'd hoped. For next week, can you read really carefully the Heideggerian piece? We'll put it against the work with the Foreman brothers so that you can see how it's playing. And I'll send this around so you get the rest of the thing to read. But also, if we could also look at Foucault's notes for an anti-fascist way of life, I think it will begin to open up this bolted door that I feel that is being faced by you at the moment. Because it's like you're just hearing these things again, but really for the first time, so it's difficult to crack into it. Shall we try that? And I'll go back to my normal lecturing style. And then also if you can bring your 30-second video or comment of some kind, that would be great. And we'll just load it into a thing and just have some sort of mad thing. Just a 30-second, 15-second. Doesn't have to be long. Are there any questions so far? I feel like there's this kind of like, and I just want to, I'm not sure that I'm understanding your questions enough to be able to field them back to you. But I think that we need to give it a different kick at the can, yeah.
What was it that he was perceiving on with the thing on his fingers and trying to work that out. As it was just in there from a technological point of view. How was he doing this? Was it the light from the phones, or was it the electromagnetic radiation of the
I
batteries?
think it's both. It's because he's got these sensors on, and they're allowing him to move they're allowing the light to create the vibrations. And so the vibrations that are creating the noise, or the sounds.
Vibrations.
Yeah, the vibrations that he's able to organize via color and movement. It's because light has a wave.
Right, okay.
You know, so it's just creating.
So it's synthesizing light waves from the images on the phones. Okay.
Do you find that interesting?
Reminds me of the book See Yourself Sensing.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the light Jean-Michel Jarre?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I can see that.
The fact that he's able to augment a organ which is usually associated with haptics, with touch,
Yeah.
and turn that into an organ which is able to perceive light, but then how it's translating that light
Yes.
is sonic.
Yes.
So what he's building is bespoke synesthesia,
Yes.
almost.
That's exactly right.
But I don't see how that applies to the Dasein.
Because that's precisely what is being done.
Bespoke synesthetic experiences where you cross senses so that it feels right. That's exciting.
What'd you say?
That's exciting.
That's a question mark or that's an
That's
exclamation
exciting.
point? Okay. Yes. Oh, good. We had a breakthrough. Good. That's it. Then I feel better now that one person has kind of, sort of, in a way. Can you repeat that?
Bespoke synesthesia.
Yes.
So I said bespoke synesthesia.
No, not that exact phrase, but.
Right. Okay. Bad phrase.
No, that's a good phrase.
The crossing of senses, the ability to hear with your eyes, to see with your nose, and it's technology, and in that case it's technology that enables him to see with his fingers, which are generally associated with haptics and touch, with feeling. But equally, could you smell something, or could you see something you could smell, or could you hear something you can smell? Translating signals. So
switch on it.
light waves into sound waves. I don't know what the signal of smell is. I don't know what the signal of haptics is. But there's a translation of wave into question mark.
Okay, now this entire side of the room is going, okay, and part of the group up here. Yes, you're right, but let's just leave it at the moment with that has something very much to do with what this older way of putting it is. The Heideggerian move between this standing on the shore and looking at the Dasein and being able to see with a different part of your body. Yeah.
So Dasein is, this question we've been trying to get head around,
Yeah.
is being human.
Is what?
It's humanity, isn't it? It's
Did you say it in German just now? With big roof?
I said being human.
Oh, being human.
Yeah. No, I'm not like that.
No. Dasein is not being human. Dasein is the magnetic force that brings you somewhere, otherwise known as, let's say, the status quo or something. It's a pulling.
Yeah.
Yes.
What about the role of translation in that? Where you're moving something
Excellent.
from one sense to another, somebody's controlling that translation.
Excellent.
It isn't absolutely fixed.
Excellent. Brilliant. Okay. Two switches on. Yes. And in fact, one of the quieter people in the room, and I just realized I left him off the syllabus, so it's going to go on immediately, is Benjamin. And the task of the translator is behind this kind of thing. In fact, Benjamin's work on the arcades, which we'll put on as well. I'm going to put it on. I don't know how to put it all. In fact, I was going to show you all the books that are behind this, that put in the arcades. Benjamin, when he was running from the Nazis, he had all of these notes that are compiled in this book. Can you imagine what that would have looked like? Because this is in a book in 1933 or whenever it was. He was racing around, running for his life, and died and didn't make it. But he was carrying zillions and zillions of notes. Just barbaric, really. Anyway, we're going to look at some of this because in here he starts getting into how does one translate, as it were, the production economies, so that one starts moving from, let's say, an industrialized economy into a technologically organized economy, again by the Techne, not by necessarily the computer itself. Then you end up having a very different relationship to not just communicating, but translating that communication. And so the translator becomes the artist. The translator is the artist, or the other way around, the artist is the translator. And so his famous article that he wrote that usually looks at art in the age of mechanical reproduction, where there's a big cry about how there was no art in the age of mechanical reproduction because you couldn't have an original. His position is that that's precisely when there's art, because the translator is the artist. So I'm glad you got that. Very good. Okay, everybody's going to have to rewind these tapes. How do we... Luke?
Something about grasp, and to touch, and to feel, and to grasp something.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a different sort of grasping as well? I'm thinking, maybe we should write a video about kick linguistics at this, but a metaphor for perceiving, to grasp something, to understand something, to have knowledge of something, to be able to grasp an idea.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different type of grasping.
It's a different type of grasping.
But grasp isn't a metaphor, it's just a different
It's a description at this point. Okay, brain hurt enough? Can we, shall we wrap this up? Or can we try to fit into the seminar room, my little seminar room? See if that works. Are you sort of know what you're going to do for next week, right? This is clear.
Do you want it on the screen?
What's that?
You don't want the actual artifacts or anything that's...
Yeah.
If
you can come up with 30 seconds of why you think this is like a mad, wild, wonderful place. Any variation of that would be fantastic. Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah, I always do that. Just what we always do.
What's that?
Just do what we always do.
Exactly.